Thank you, Ingmar, for that prayer. Thank you, Ryan, as well, for leading those songs. This is just one person, so just take it for that. But I do appreciate standing to sing. When I was young, I didn't like to stand to sing. I liked to relax. I could relax better sitting. But something about me has changed since then, and I'll let you guess what that is. I can sing better standing up now. I'd like to change that, but I do like singing standing up. Once again, that's just me. I wanted to look at the story of David and Goliath today. It's a archetype for a story of insurmountable obstacles, apparently insurmountable obstacles, and overcoming that. People probably understand that story that don't even know that it comes from the Bible. It has such a deep purchase in our literary history, and the overall history of the English-speaking world. It's such a deep story, and yet for such a long time, I feel like I've had a very sort of shallow understanding of what it was. It was perfectly fine. I don't think you have to have the understanding that I feel like God has given me of this story to get something of use out of it. For sure, you don't have to hear me explain it. That sounds arrogant even to contemplate. But I grew up hearing the story and just sort of thinking of it in terms of David, this boy. He had this little slingshot, this little pebble, and miraculously he took this giant out, and God just made that happen. Now the reality is that's all true. God did just make that happen, but the story, if you understand the weaponry involved, if you understand the story, and you look at just how people are, you make some what Lyndon calls sanctified speculations or sanctified imagination. I think sometimes that's a clever phrase for the speaker to beg some understanding and not to throw me out as a heretic if I present something in a little different way than it's been presented before. But that's fine. That's how I use the phrase. So I think I'm going to read through it and make comments as we read different sections. It's a rather long chapter. It's a familiar story, so I think I'm going to avoid rereading it as much as possible. It's the story is out of 1 Samuel chapter 17. David and Goliath. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for pitched camp at Ephes Dammon between Soka and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle line to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied the hill and the Israelites another with the valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. He was over 9 feet tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Now you get the picture of there's different people has done the math. I am not going to go into great detail, but you can imagine a very tall person, a very big person with very intimidating weaponry, a spear that you definitely wouldn't survive if you was an unfortunate victim of it, which was his, as far as I can tell, is his primary weapon. Goliath stood and shouted at the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are not you servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the ranks of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now here Goliath he's defying anyone to take him on one. And he presented this intimidating picture, and it was very effective. It completely, I believe that it trapped him sort of in a spiritual way. But we'll get into that. I think it was basically kind of a spiritual blindness, probably fear-induced spiritual blindness that come over the Israelites as this man defied them, defied their God, and that was implied in all of this. Verse 12, David enters the story. Now David was the son of an Ephrathite named Jesse, who was from Bethlehem in Judah. Jesse had 8 sons, and in Paul's time he was old and well advanced in years. Jesse's 3 oldest sons had followed Saul to the war. The firstborn was Eliab, the second Abinadab, the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Saul. But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Now, there's a possibility that I draw just a little bit of understanding for David because I'm the youngest son as well. And there's some things that I do see in this story that probably youngest sons would be more likely to see. You see that he was the don't hear this in any kind of a complaining way. This is how life is. It's perfectly fine. But he tended the sheep. That was not a high status job. And then when he was needed to called off to do something else, in this case to deliver food, maybe it would be what's the name of those food deliveries, DoorDash, and maybe it was, you could think of him as a DoorDash driver. Kind of helps you place his status there in life. And a shepherd probably was not any better. Let's see, where did I leave off reading? Now Jesse said to his son David, "Take this ephah of roasted grains and these 10 loaves of bread for your brothers, and hurry to their camp. Take along these 10 cheeses to the commander of their unit. See how your brothers are, and bring back some assurance from them. They are with Saul and all the men of Israel in the valley of Elah, fighting against the Philistines." Early in the morning, David left the flock with the shepherd, loaded up, and set out, as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp, and the army was going out to its battle positions, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines, facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brothers. As he was talking with them, Goliath, the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from the lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. Now, it doesn't say that David ran along, but it seems implied he would have been left behind by himself if he didn't travel with presumably his brothers, and no doubt it was a little bit of chaos. Now, the Israelites had been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel, the king. To defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage, and will exempt his father's family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him, "What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" And right there you get David's motivation into this. He was upset with the challenges that was directed at God. His motivation was to correct that. Obviously, we remember later on David was identified as a man after God's own heart. He clearly had a relationship with God. We should point out that as far as we can tell, he was anointed king. At this stage, stage in the story. He had already been anointed king. Kind of the same thing there. He was the youngest, and Jesse kept bringing out his sons and sort of losing hope and losing hope and losing hope. And finally, he got down to David, and Samuel had to prompt him to send for David. Like that, just David was not really an option here. And it turned out to be David was the one that God wanted Samuel to anoint. So not only does David see this as Goliath challenging Israel and challenging Israel's God, he probably knew there was probably something in him that understood he was anointed, that he was anointed as leader, and part of his role was going to be to defeat the Philistines. That was the existential enemy that the Israelites faced, was these Philistines, and Goliath was representing them here. As he was asking them these questions, they repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." Then Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men. He burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know how conceited you are and how very wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle." Now, as the youngest son again, I can easily understand why an older brother would have that perspective of a younger son. Younger sons can be very imperfect, very well. I'm not even going to go into the details. Y'all are all people, and probably there's some youngest sons in your families, and maybe some of you are youngest sons. But if you simply look at the most negative aspects of a person's life, and you sort of form your view of that's who they are, it's pretty, it's understandable how this sort of an impression could be formed of an impetuous son. I kind of suspicioned at times if part of the reason he was a shepherd was just to get him out of there. I don't believe David was a pleasant person. I don't think he was a charismatic person that people just was naturally drawn to. And that stands a little bit in contrast to the common perception that we have of him, because he did have a very loyal following after Saul started pursuing him. He had 600 men, I believe, that stuck with him through thick and thin. And that's very real. Those men, they seen something in him, no doubt about that. But as he was king and throughout his life being the king of Israel, it seems like his relationship with as his position in king, it was more of a transactional thing. He was very successful later on delivering the Israelites from the Philistines, and for that reason, they let him be king. They give him that honor, because they didn't know who else they would be able to rely on to keep the Philistines at bay. They was a very powerful and war-happy people. But different things, when David's sons was turning against him, normally that looks pretty disloyal, and that's not very attractive. That's one of the reasons that I believe David's position as king was largely transactional, and as a person, he was not generally that well loved. Another little indicator, when the ark was brought into Jerusalem, his wife, that probably never really loved him, was that he actually won, as this story goes on, Michal. She was embarrassed and upset with him because he was expressing this very unking-like exuberance about the presence of God coming into Jerusalem. And to me, that's really the inspiration for this message, is David's ability to set important things aside, like being king-like and being proper, for something that was better. he could recognize that he knew that the presence of God, that was more important than him maintaining some kind of perception of kingliness. I'm getting ahead of the story a little bit, but that it was that same mentality that allowed him to look at Goliath defying Israel, defying God. It was that mentality that allowed him to look at that situation and see a completely different picture than what all of the other Israelites in this army seen. They seen an overwhelming obstacle that they could not imagine overcoming. I might have already read it. Goliath defied him 40 days at this point. You can already get the picture you can put yourself in the shoes of the Israelites, and you can imagine their fear, their terror at this, and their almost certainty that they was having conversations with themselves of, maybe we can make peace and just simply be servants of these Philistines. Then we can live. Then we don't have to face this. If we just surrender, maybe we can be their slaves, their servants. Maybe we can work for them, and this can work out. You can just imagine, sanctified imagination. You can imagine that some of that was probably going through their minds. They was defeated spiritually. They was defeated. They was ready to be looking for compromises. And David just had a completely different mindset, a completely different picture. Let me get back into the story at verse 29. After Eliab said these very harsh words, that's not what a younger brother wants to hear an older brother say. "Now what have I done?" said David. "Can I even speak?" He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against the Philistine and fight him. You are only a boy, and he has been fighting man from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." Once again, you see the indignation coming out there from David, that this God that David has a relationship with, that I trust we all have a relationship with, there was this man just openly defying him. And this could not be. I learned something as I was actually fairly late into my study here. I always mentally had this picture of David killing the bear and the lion with his sling. And I'm actually not certain that he didn't push the truth just a little bit here in his effort to persuade Saul that he could go and take on this giant. And the reason that I believe that may have been the case, the Goliath's strength was in hand-to-hand, close-quarter combat. And that's not how David was thinking about taking this on. David had a weapon. It's a sling, and you have to know a little bit about slings for this, in my opinion. You have to know about slings for this story to work. I fully intended to have a sling, and due to my lack of organization, I still don't have a sling to show you, but they're a relatively powerful weapon. They're very accurate, and somebody that knows what they're doing. If you just get a sling and start trying it out, watch out. It's going to go every which direction. I have played with them enough to know that. But they're pretty powerful weapons. I was doing some research to reconfirm. I had looked into all this many years ago now. And a sling wielded by someone that probably had quite a bit of practice time in as they was watching the sheep, and as they was a boy, and they was no doubt had a warrior mindset. He was no doubt defeating imaginary enemies on a daily basis. Someone with that type of skill with a sling can easily hit a forehead-sized target at 30 or 40 yards. And you can hit it with the size of a stone, probably about a pound. Slings was weapons of war, and we know what these stones was because we can find them in historic battlefields archaeologically, and they probably weighed between 8 and 20 ounces, more likely somewhere around 15 ounces. But that weapon can deliver as much knockdown power as a common weapon that police use nowadays. David was not just taking a chance here. He was confident in the ability of his weapon. But I do believe that it was dishonorable for David to take on an opponent using a different weapon. The honor culture that surrounds warrior cultures, they really value one-on-one, fair, even combats. And that would have been the setting that this was. It would be, man to man. Of course, never mind one guy's weighs twice as much and is half again as tall, and can throw a much heavier spear. The idea would have been David should have had a spear and a sword just like Goliath did. Once again, sanctified imagination. I believe it was rather dishonorable what David did in the eyes of the people here. That wasn't what David was worried about. David was worried about fulfilling his responsibilities before God. He was worried about defending God's honor. Now, I do think we can probably go sideways if we get too zealous in defending God, because we can't defend God as well as God can defend himself. But that's a side point. So I believe he needed to present a story to Saul that he could do this. He could do this with hand-to-hand combat. I think that's why he framed his killing the lion and his killing the bear as a hand-to-hand combat. I don't know how you kill a lion and a bear the way he describes it, but maybe he did. Maybe I'll leave that where it is. After he persuaded Saul, Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around, because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I am not used to them." So he took them off. But if you notice, he already had permission to go do this from the king. And the king was no more interested in fighting Goliath than any of his men. So he was not incentivized to try to stop him. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, and put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag. And with his sling in hand, he approached the Philistine. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was only a boy, ruddy and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." And David responds to Goliath similarly. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Once again, his motivation for defending God's honor and wanting God's glory to be shown comes through. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. That, of course, that's the peak of the story, so to speak. That's what the whole point of the story is driving towards. But I have to reiterate that David simply seen a completely different set of obstacles. In all reality, the Israelite army and King Saul was David's obstacle in this battle. That's what he had to overcome. Saul was not he had the tools and the confidence to deal with the Goliath problem. Forgive me for there's really no way to in our Christianized worldview, and we're talking about a glorious defeat and killing of an opponent of God. It's a little uncomfortable. I'll have to be honest. But that's the obstacle that I see David having overcome. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with his sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and ran. You could just imagine how the tables turned here. They had probably thought that they had this thing. They had the Israelites completely terrified, and finally they sent this little boy out there, this young guy. He probably wasn't little. I think he was probably very, very stout and pretty well filled out, I'm guessing. But he was very young. He was inexperienced. You could see that he was young by Goliath's response to him. And they probably thought, man, they've really lost it now, sending out an inexperienced guy like this. And yet, from David's perspective, he simply was. He had an edge in his weaponry. He could stay in a safe, relatively safe distance from Goliath. There's two different schools of thought here. David picked up 5 stones. Goliath had 3 brothers and a dad that was also giants. Some people say he was prepared to take them all out if they stepped up and took Goliath's place. I think that's a possibility. But I also think that David he could miss. He wasn't overconfident. He could miss, but that wasn't going to be the end of him. The battle wouldn't be over because he didn't have to be within spear throwing distance from Goliath. Excuse me. So there was a rather grisly end to Goliath's life there. As Saul watched David going out to meet the Philistine, he said to Abner, commander of the army, "Abner, whose son is that young man?" Abner replied, "As surely as you live, O king, I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." So as I was thinking about the message and preparing it and studying for it, I was thinking primarily of applying it in our personal life. God does call us individually to do lots of different things, and I believe we have a church here that is very open to God working in somebody's life in a way that is unfamiliar with me, that I don't necessarily understand, but we're pretty open to allow God to do that, and that's something I value about this group of people, small though we are. I value that really, really, really much. If we could see the whole picture, if we could see exactly what somebody else sees, God calling them to do, where God's calling them to serve. It's no difficulty. There's no challenge in that. That's not how life is. We're different people. We see different things. We've been shaped to value different things slightly differently, and we're here. And I believe there's just such an openness to having real discussions about how we value those things in our lives, the traditions that we do value. Back to David and the honor thing, assuming it was a bit dishonorable for David to take this approach. It's not unreasonable concern to consider your fellow man and how a thing is going to affect your community. But it's pretty obvious that the community was going to be much worse affected if Goliath was to win this battle, if Goliath was to be defeated. Much better that, in David's view, that David take that reputational hit and solve this problem, get this problem out of the way. That once again, you can see the exasperation coming out of him as he's just trying to figure out, like, why isn't this problem being solved? Why isn't someone taking this battle on and dealing with it? So that's the heart of my message, that we have a relationship with God. Understanding through that relationship with God, God's going to give us a real picture, a real vision of things He wants us to do. And do we trust Him to step out, even when the odds look bad, overwhelming, even when it looks sometimes not the greatest in the eyes of others around us? It's a sensitive thing. You have to take people's concerns seriously. You really do. You have to hear people, be open to people, seek counsel that goes against this thing that you believe God is calling you towards. But I just encourage you to get in the battle. It's real, and there's victory there for those that pursue it honestly and seriously. May we have a song.